At a young age, as early as I can remember, I noticed that I could feel other people's energy. I didn't think much about it, just that I could feel it. It was normal. I didn't give it much thought. I just knew sometimes the feeling was good, like an inviting kind of way. I was drawn to people because it gave me this sort of happy feeling. And sometimes I avoided people because it just didn't feel right. And somehow I always knew if someone was feeling down or sad, that feeling drew me to people. It was like I wanted to comfort them. And as I got older, it continued to be a normal part of who I was. I just assumed it to be true for everyone. So I never really talked about it much. Thinking back, those feelings that I got is what led me to being categorized as a servant leader in business, uh, as uh, in whatever I did, you know, over the last 25, 30 years. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, I discovered the term heart centered leadership. It felt very similar to servant leadership, which is essentially prioritizing the needs of others and leading with empathy. The real difference between the two is that heart centered leadership puts a stronger emphasis on emotional intelligence and personal connection. That feeling of connecting on a human level, that feeling that creates a sense of belonging, goes much deeper than just servant leadership. And a few years ago, I discovered the HeartMath Institute, and that really opened my eyes to understanding of how and why I felt things and felt the way that I did. Because our bodies give off these radio frequencies, this energy that resonates from our heart. And that's what HeartMath Institute helped me understand. And on my journey, I've just been scratching the surface. I've been learning about heart centered leadership and connecting with others who are also on this journey. So, back in March of 2024, this kind soul, Jan Jeremias, reached out to me on LinkedIn. She messaged me, and I asked her what caused her to message me. And she said that it was my tagline said, kindness matters. And so she wanted to connect. So we jumped on a Zoom call. And during our discussion, she says, you have to meet Seamus Power. I think the two of you will have a lot to talk about. So Seamus and I connected. We've been connecting every month on Zoom over the last 7 months. We have a standing call that we just connect, and of course there's a 6 hour time difference, so we have to coordinate our schedules. It's usually about 6:30 a.m. my time and about 1:30 in the afternoon his time, 12:30, 1:30 between those times because Seamus lives just outside of Dublin, Ireland. Um, and I always enjoy my conversations with him. We chat about life, we chat about work, what book we're reading, what podcast we're currently listening to. We really have no agenda. We just schedule time and chat. And we always end up having a really great conversation. I feel energized after I get off of my call with Seamus. And so I thought it would be great to share one of our conversations with you. So, Seamus is a certified HeartMath coach, in addition to being Lean Six Sigma and having a master's in science for health psychology. He started his own company in the UK called Powering Health. So I asked him to be my guest today. So, look, thank you for being here. Thank you for pressing play. I hope you find value in our conversation. Seamus Power, welcome to the Lead with Your Heart podcast. How are you doing, my friend?
Yeah, fantastic. I just love the conversations. And I have to thank Jan, who was our mutual connection, for making the connection in the first place. Like, it's been fantastic. And I think we both learned a lot from each other through the conversations and the flow and the connection we've had. And I suppose the underlying theme of that is connection to ourselves, which is really what my own story is about, really. And back to the word experience, I suppose, of creating space from our inside out to have the type of conversations we've had and feel very comfortable having them and experiencing that connection, I think. And that's what's been a key part, I think, of why we've enjoyed each other's company so far, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And just for the listeners, just before I hit record, it's been a couple of years since I've done a podcast, and I pressed, pause back in 2022, and you walked me through this meditation of just breathing, and it was
Mm.
so wonderful to be still. It was so wonderful just to connect with my heart and the flow of my energy and the flow of my oxygen. And so this is something that you do regularly, right? With people in
I'm doing it right
organizations.
now.
Yeah.
As we speak, I'm breathing using the HeartMath tools, and I've integrated into everything I do. My every living moment, almost, you could say, is around. It's become an automatic process for me of experiencing the power of stillness from my inside out because I wasn't always that soldier. I worked in corporate for many, many years, and even I remember as a young boy, a teenager, and a young man in his 20s, finding his way in the world, being completely disconnected and not really appreciating the power of who I am and what's important to me and what I'm ready and prepared to take a stand for. So HeartMath and that process, it's only probably in the last 5 years that that's become a coherent, like coherence is a HeartMath word, but that's become a complete part of how I show up for myself. And it's amazing how it's kind of allowed me to have the type of conversations we've had in the last year and allow me to have honest conversations that I was having when I had that, you know, real visceral sense of disconnection that I lived with for many years. I accepted that this is the way life was, but then eventually the pain of that became an invitation to really get curious with, you know, where that resistance was coming from, of that niggle I had of disconnection. And it's been such a liberating journey since I left the corporate world in 2018 to form my own company called Powering Health, to allow myself, I suppose, and have the privilege of beginning to really delve deeply into that connection to self and, and experiencing the power of that. And I think that's why and where our conversations have been so powerful too, because I think it's a very, very common human experience to maybe have that sense of disconnection and maybe not really understand or know how you can feel safe beginning to examine that. And, a good friend of mine who's passed away actually recently often spoke about what's in the way is the way.
Hmm.
And what a simple statement, but what a courageous thing it is to do, to be able to actually engage with this niggle or this something that you don't know quite what it is, that's in your way to who you really are and what you want to take a stand for, because often we're so busy focused on pleasing others and doing and serving others, maybe at the expense of not serving yourselves. And that is part of my own journey, I suppose, my own experience in the corporate world as playing a role, but a role wasn't necessarily, and I think the more I reflect on it, wasn't really who I was. And now I think my work is about inviting people to engage in that work and find that blend and balance that just works for them, and how and when and how far they're ready to kind of honor themselves in an externally busy and action-oriented world, I guess, and a goal-oriented world, I guess. So that's kind of what's been underpinning, I think, my life and where I see and how I serve people who are ready to begin to experience that as in their everyday lives, I guess.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for doing what you do. Um, and I really love that what you said, what is in the way is the way. And I
Mm.
can relate so much, and I think everybody can, that there's so much disconnection in the world and in business. I mean, I like to talk about the business world because, frankly, we spend most of our lives in that world, right? When you take out sleep and then you take the amount of time that you're in working, our life outside of work is short for most people,
Mm,
right? We work, 40, 50, 60 hours a week sometimes, um, and what's in the way is often the way. We get so disconnected from ourselves, and it because we're always
mm,
outside of ourselves doing.
mm,
And I love the saying, "How are we being while we're doing?" Right?
mm,
And
mm.
that's what this is about. It's about pausing, centering with yourself, uh, being vulnerable with yourself, and then after that, taking it into conversation with others, right? I mean, the human connection is so, so powerful. We don't think about it much because we stay so busy, and I'll use quotes around
Mm,
that, right? We stay
mm.
busy doing things, and being connected with yourself. I mean, there's the saying, right? You have to love yourself before you can love others,
Yeah.
and it's such, oversaid, but it's so powerful.
Mm,
um and I'll tell you, Seamus, I was looking through my journal because I do a lot of journaling, and I went back to one of our first conversations, and you were talking about positive intelligence. And I recently, just last week, was having a conversation and somebody mentioned positive intelligence. And I thought, I've heard this before. And then this
mhm.
morning, I saw it in my journal from one of our first conversations back in March of 2024. And yeah, I love it. And I want to know more about it. And it's something that you practice, right?
Yeah, it's become one of the central tools, I suppose, of many. And I've been influenced by some fantastic researchers and authors and books. And this program is led by a guy called Shirzad Shamin. He's based in San Diego. And he offered a grant to coaches to participate in learning and becoming certified in what he's termed positive intelligence. And simply, it becomes a process of becoming aware of what he termed, and the thing that really attracted me to this program in the beginning was the use of the word saboteur, and noticing our saboteurs within ourselves and how harsh and critical those saboteurs can be sometimes. And again, I put my hand up and say, I was that
Yeah, me
soldier.
too.
And he describes them master judge, like, and we judge ourselves so harshly, like in the way that we would never judge other people. And that kind of got me very curious about the PQ concept and the PQ program. And he stepped us right through a 6 week program, inviting us to examine our saboteurs, inviting the harsh critic we all have within ourselves. And a beautiful part of that journey and that program is the transition from, yes, becoming aware of the saboteur, quietening that judge, noticing how harmful that judge is, and then switching us into a much more sage way. And I love that word as well, a sage way of being, because it's quietening the judge and it's amplifying the beautiful person that we all are from a sage perspective and the wisdom of the sage. And you talk about empathy, you talk about compassion, you talk about then exploring and the liberation that comes with reframing and quietening. It's an experiential thing of quietening and noticing the saboteurs, calling them out for the damage they're doing, and really amplifying the sage we all have within us, and nurturing that back to connection and back to who we really are, what we really care and stand for. It's about navigating towards that, towards our core values of who we are, our self-esteem. And that's why the PQ program is so powerful, along with HeartMath, because HeartMath is the channel to connection. And I learned about HeartMath and started utilizing HeartMath before I came to PQ. And I think it was a beautiful combination then. And Susan David is another part of that story. And so is Ethan Cross. But maybe we can talk about those separately. But they've all blended together. But PQ is such a fundamental part of that because I just love PQ more so. I suppose the whole program is fantastic, but it's noting the saboteurs. But I just love the idea, my own experience of really employing the sage powers in a more deliberate and automatic way that serves me better from my inside out. And there's a true ripple effect from that because, as you mentioned earlier, when I'm being kinder to myself, I'm being kinder to everyone else outside myself as well. So there's like an internal ripple effect of reinforcement through the sage powers that emanate out in a way that allows me to engage completely differently with everyone around me because I'm engaging differently from within myself as well. And there's all other sorts of tools that kind of really complement the PQ experience. And again, PQ is a really like it's a fundamental part of, I suppose, allowing me to act in a way. And these are some of the sage words like it's empathy, explore, navigate, create, innovate, and act. So they are the kind of the five or six sage powers that shares us, guides us through, and allows us and invites us to experience and show up to in our own lives. And that for me has been such a fantastic experience.
Yeah, I really love that because I mean, all this stuff is not new, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's been around for ages and ages and ages. But what I really love about it is that more people are talking about our vulnerabilities. Like we're imperfect creatures, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were created with fractures, and just identifying some of that because again in the business world, well, even in social media for the longest time it's like people post images about their best self, right? You
Mm-hmm.
don't see the vulnerable moments. You just, and then as a human being seeing a world of perfection, or having a boss or a leader who has this armor on, who
Mm-hmm.
wants to show up and just show you the command and control, and you need to be like this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's terrible. I mean, it when we can start to identify and have conversations about things that are human, right? Like we're all
Mm-hmm.
human beings. We're all working through some stuff. We're all trying to figure it out as we go. I was just when you were talking, it made me think of Brene Brown in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection. She said, "The dark does not destroy the light, it defines it. It's our fear of the dark that casts our joy into the shadows." And I just love Brene Brown.
Mm-hmm.
She's so authentic, um, and the dark doesn't exist without light. Light doesn't exist without dark. And it's really like you use the word navigate, right? Like we just
Mm-hmm.
navigate through this stuff and figure out how to not self sabotage ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and and be good humans and connect with ourselves and connect with others in that way and say, you know what, it's okay. We're all in different stages, different paths. We're learning,
Mm-hmm.
and constant, and life is about constant learning, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
constant
Yeah.
growth.
Yeah, and I think we fall into the trap of playing a role, and that is an essential part of disconnection because you're playing the role of the executive, the CEO, the team leader, whatever it is. That's obviously very important in the outside world to our our success, our business, our own personal success gets tied in and labeled to the role, our elevation through the corporate ranks get tied to our identity of who we are, and we're playing that role. And oftentimes it might be that, and again, I'm speaking from my own experience. On the face of it, everything is going really well. You're successful. You're climbing the ranks. You're earning good cash. Everything is going really well on the face of it. But there is still that niggle that's going on around. Well, how aligned am I with what I really care about? And because the role is so important, I think that for me is it's a key part of the courage it takes to differentiate or maybe become more discerning. And that's why I love the work you're doing now, because it's an invitation for successful people, inverted commas, like as we define success in business, around examining, the roots of that success and how deep are the roots of that success, compared to when you examine really what's important to you, as Brené Brown invites us to do, and as Susan David invites us to do. Um, and my own experience is that when you're playing that role, you're so focused on the communication to the outside world. And again, it brings me right back to a program I do called Step Away for a Day. At the beginning, I talk about communication being central part of business success. And communication in modern businesses has become to be, to be the formula for success of business. Communication comes to the top of the pile every time when you speak about your brainstorming session. Well, what is it we really need to do well to be successful in business? It's communicate. But it's always universally being communication to our teams, our peers, our stakeholders, our partners, our customers, always externally focused. But I can't ever remember a time in a business meeting in corporate where there was an invitation to really examine how you're communicating with yourself. And so it's
Yeah.
so simple. And that for me comes back to that whole idea of disconnection, of showing up in the outside world that's kind of separated from what you really care about. Because, and again, I can understand this, like there's so much of our busy, externally focused lives that are essentially important to our lifestyle, our career. So much is hinging on our ability to play that role. It becomes, it does become our identity. But I think there's great power, whenever it is right for you to have the courage to kind of maybe challenge that identity and have the courage to go back. And maybe you don't have to change the whole world. You don't have to go to be a hermit out of your busy executive office. But there's small tweaks and tunes that are the invitation is that could be right for you to begin to maybe just open the doors slightly and gradually at a pace that just feels right to you, to be
Yeah.
able to not abandon the success of the business world and abandon, because you've got responsibilities in the role that you play to your employees, to your fiduciary responsibility, to the profits and the success of your company, but not at the total disconnection loss of yourself. And I think that's the invitation, I have, and I think as you're doing your own work, is to find that bridge and blend between having a successful business but not at the cost of a complete disconnection from what we truly care about and what's important to us. And I suppose the last thing I would say, Jason, and that is just brings it back to Brené Brown, and Susan David had a great quote that kind of came to mind as you were talking about Brené Brown, and they had a great podcast as well that I'd encourage people to listen to or find. But discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life. Like, I mean, it's like what a powerful
Mm.
quote that is. Like to sometimes we resist. It's going back to kind of what's in the way is the way, and sometimes we kind of resist going to a place of discomfort. But that sums up Susan David for me. Discomfort is the price, is the admission of what it is. Discomfort is the price of admission to a meaningful life, and that
Yeah.
that is the invitation to find that blend that just works right for successful business, but from a foundation of a successful, connected person as well to what you truly care about.
Yeah. I, gosh, I love a lot of that. Going back to communication, communication is the oil in a well-ran machine,
Mm,
right? And thinking about corporate, and listen, communicating with yourself and being open and honest with yourself and being vulnerable with yourself and identifying, what, gosh, this does make me uncomfortable, and why does it make me uncomfortable, or
mm,
how, you know, uh, growth is in discomfort, right?
mm,
And those are the moments, like you said, what is in the way is the way. And when you
mm.
start to feel that moment of discomfort internally, we should pay attention to that,
Oh
right? We
yeah.
should pay attention to that, and we should lean in and figure out how do we navigate through that stuff. Um, and you mentioned um, some of the work that I'm doing, and we've talked about quite a few people. And I think it's worth mentioning, Patrick Lencioni's work with
Mm,
the Table Group, his company, and the Working Genius, the 6 types of
mm,
Working Genius. I discovered that a little over a year ago and became certified as a facilitator. And it's amazing because it is about productivity and business, but it's
mhm,
about identifying those vulnerabilities in yourself and your
mhm.
strengths, right? Like
Absolutely.
identifying the things that give you energy, the things that drain your energy, for yourself and for your team. And that's emotional intelligence, right?
Mm,
That's growing. And so when you start to identify those things for yourself and you communicate and you're open to other people as well, because we're all human, right? We're not the only human person on the team. Everybody on the team is human. And and when we can start communicating, and then there's this natural collaboration that starts to happen and function. And when you can create space like that as a leader, um it's amazing for your team. But I think the important thing that we're talking about is doing it for yourself first,
mm, mm,
right? Like, you've got to be in a good place. You've got to be vulnerable with yourself. You've got to know your strengths, know your what drains your energy, what gives you energy. And and a lot of the work that you're doing with mindfulness and meditation and just connecting with the heart, I mean, all this stuff is so important. And
mhm.
yeah, that's one of the reasons I wanted to record our chat today, is
Yeah.
because it is this global movement. I mean, here I am in East Texas. You're talking about somebody in San Diego, and you're in Ireland, and I've had conversations similar to this, Seamus, with people in different parts of the world, and there is this movement of a shift of
Mm,
people talking about these things, and it's not all about perfection anymore. It's not all about, I don't want you to see past my armor. Um,
mm. Yeah.
and it's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, because it goes back to Ethan Kroos as well. He's brought so much together for me as well. Just I read his book recently called Chatter, and that is the invitation to. And we have such a sophisticated inner guidance system. That's what's come out of this process that we talk about stillness and mindfulness and the power of the saboteurs and where they lead us and the lies they tell us. And Ethan Kroos kind of talked about like how we can begin to engage and make better sense of the inner narrative, the inner voice, the critic, and we absolutely need that. That's an essential part of being human. Is this ongoing narrative? But the problem comes in when it kind of misleads us, like as Shirzad in his work in PQ described the saboteur kind of takes over and kind of creates havoc, basically, literally
Yeah.
from our inside out. But if we can have the skills to be able to calibrate how that inner voice is serving us or not, and comes back again. This is why it's so beautiful with Susan David, and why they gel, and with Brenda Brown, and why they gel so well together, because it's about noticing. So it, like we're noticing the saboteur, we're noticing when we're being harsh on ourselves, and that's our invitation. Ah, okay, now this is my opportunity to challenge what that inner voice is telling me, to get discerning about, is this serving me or is this misleading me and not being very helpful at all? And intervening in the heat of the moment, and then being able to actually get beneath, basically, that inner chatter, the inner voice, and then to begin to calibrate that. And the more we do that, and this comes back to Shirzad and Susan David, it's about the cycle and the practice of building that emotional muscle and that's the power of stillness and the power of simply taking a breath. So when you're in, a very overwhelming situation, it's the simplicity of, as Susan David would put it, I'm noticing I'm feeling overwhelmed. It's not that I'm overwhelmed or I'm angry and sad. There's a separation that both Susan and David talk about of separating ourselves from that, owning that space or that emotion. And Ethan Kroos talks about this as well. It's about I am noticing. that Seamus is feeling angry. I'm noticing I'm feeling overwhelmed. And that's a fantastic space creator because it allows us to separate ourselves from this feeling of overwhelmed and allow us to comfort ourselves and maybe just give ourselves a hug, to
Yeah.
say, to give ourselves that space. Okay, I'm feeling under threat. I'm feeling like I'm not feeling very safe. I'm feeling, I'm not going to make a very good decision from this space. And this is back to the central part of bridging into business benefits from noticing, creating space, even the inner voice, and then to begin to calibrate that. And the more we do that, and this comes back to Shirzad and Susan David, it's about, the cycle and the practice of building that emotional muscle and that's the power of stillness and the power of simply taking a breath. So when you're in, a very overwhelming situation, it's the simplicity of, as Susan David would put it, I'm noticing I'm feeling overwhelmed. It's not that I'm overwhelmed or I'm angry, I'm sad. There's a separation that both Susan and David talk about of separating ourselves from that, owning that space or that emotion. And Ethan Kroos talks about this as well. It's about, I am noticing that Seamus is feeling angry. I'm noticing I'm feeling overwhelmed. And that's a fantastic space creator because it allows us to separate ourselves from this feeling of overwhelm and allow us to comfort ourselves and maybe just give ourselves a hug,
Yeah.
to give ourselves that space. Okay, I'm feeling under threat. I'm feeling like I'm not feeling very safe. I'm feeling, I'm not going to make a very good decision from this space. And this is back to the central part of bridging into business benefits from noticing, creating space, the very fact that you're noticing and accepting and challenging this inner narrative, or that you're engaging with this sense of overwhelm, or I'm not feeling very safe, or I'm feeling whatever it is. Susan David would say, this is simply so vital information from your inside out that it's time to actually engage with this. Go to where the pain is. Don't push it away. What's in the way is the way. Go there, understand what that information is telling you, and then apply that to making better decisions for your team, your business, for yourself, from your inside out. And again, there's a powerful ripple effect of that. Going back to what you just shared, is it begins with how you process your emotions within yourself as a leader. And I think that's such a powerful invitation for every person, from the leader downwards, right through the whole organization, every human being, is to develop the skills to be able to better notice in the heat of the moment what's going on and to feel that we have a process that allows us to feel safe regardless of whatever we're noticing, basically, because the processes that we're talking about here are simply the most innate, valuable human processes you can imagine from our sophisticated inner guidance system. And all we're doing is calibrating that through a process of breath,
Yeah.
stillness, to make better decisions out of that. And it can become an automatic process once we experience, back to the word experience, the power of, okay, this is time now for me to engage with what I'm noticing and harness, the power of what this information is telling me.
Yeah. It's that awareness, right? It
Mm,
starts, it starts with awareness. Like you said, just noticing those moments.
mm,
I think a lot about, you mentioned, strengthening our thoughts and strengthen our mind, I believe, when you were talking about positive intelligence. And, it's like if you were to touch the stove accidentally and you burn yourself, your body, physical body says, "Oh, I need to tend to that," right? Because
mm,
there's an injury.
yeah.
And the more we can be aware of those with our those heart moments, those spiritual moments, those inner inner chatter, and
Mm,
be aware of it and tend to it, right?
yeah.
Because just like touching a hot stove is the self sabotage that we tell ourselves, right? It's like, oh, there's that thing again. I need to
Mm,
be aware of it and how to tend to it. And really, it's building this mental fortitude and our heart knows the way. And so the more we can open up and align our inner voice with our outer voice, and we can strengthen and condition that. We have to practice it, right? Like physically,
Yeah.
if you want to build your muscles, you go to the gym,
Mm.
but you can't go one day. You have to go
Yeah.
consistently, right?
Precisely.
The same thing
Mm.
with our mental fortitude of having a positive change and outlook on how we see the world, and accepting, the things that we can't control, the things we can control, and knowing the difference. I
Mm.
mean, that's really what this is about, saying, um, because it's our thoughts are so, so powerful.
Mm.
There's this saying that our thoughts will lead you wherever you direct them.
Mm.
And if you're thinking about obstacles all day, if you're thinking about I can't all day, if you're
Mm.
thinking about I'm not good enough all day, then guess what?
Mm.
That's where you reside. But if you're
Fantastic.
thinking about how can I work through this? First of all, just like we were saying, being aware and
Mm.
knowing that we have all that we need. We
Mm.
just need to tap into that and allow ourselves to navigate through it. And
Mm.
yeah, I love this conversation, man.
Mm. And it's about honoring. I mean, that word honoring is coming up again and again, but it's honoring that emotion. It's
Yeah.
honoring the information that our body is presenting to us. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
there for a reason. And
Yeah.
it's so simple. A good friend of mine, Breda, she's been such an inspiration for me as well. She's living here close to me in Dublin, and she was the one to introduce me kind of to the simplicity of this process. Of being still and simply noticing, and then honoring what we're noticing, because it's the most simplest thing you can imagine. Of look, what happens when someone else says something to us and we dismiss it? Like, if you were talking to someone in a conversation, they say something, and you say, oh, that's a load of rubbish, and you dismiss it and you move on. That's kind of what we're doing to our body all the time when it's providing this wonderful information from inside out, and we're just dismissing it, discounting it, and just plowing on regardless. So that is such a powerful reminder for me, to, again, from my own experience of, remember, like, through that noticing process, you're really honoring the information that is coming up from the most innate human source, if you want,
Yeah.
and it's so valuable, the information that's coming to us, and we just often dismiss it because we're so busy out doing the stuff we're doing. But it's such a valuable reservoir of information that goes untapped a lot of the time, I think, and this is the power of this work, is tapping into this valuable, hugely critical information that's often ignored, that can be harnessed for business success. So it's that blend of, this is a real business resource, that I'm so passionate about, and the work I do is I think it's about building that bridge to actually invite business successful business leaders, or business leaders of all types, employees, every person we talked about before, to maybe begin to think about, the power of this as a practice to blend into and be part of your successful business strategy, because it's certainly something that I think it's still a challenge for most executives and successful business people to think about. How could this possibly contribute to successful business? But I think when we go and examine and get curious with it, we can begin to actually experience it from our inside out, how it can be applied.
Yeah, it's really interesting because in corporate or in the business world, we're constantly talking about productivity and efficiencies and getting better.
Mm.
And I was at an event last month in Frisco, Texas. It was a Heart Profit event, and there was a guest speaker, Faith Riviera, and she was talking about how stress impacts the brain
Mm.
and the different levels of stress, and that when our brains are under immense amounts of stress, then we don't function at our best self. We have
Mm.
trouble putting our thoughts together. We have trouble being productive. So our productivity level actually lowers
Mm,
from a human standpoint when our brains are under stress. And so in the business world, we talk about wanting to be more productive.
mm,
And if we were just to adopt some of these things that you're talking about, like the breath
mm,
work that you walked me through earlier,
mm,
that breath work reduces our stress level, and we start to feel all of ourselves, right? Our whole self. And when we're at that state, we're much more productive for ourselves. We're much more productive for our employer and in the world. And
mm,
there's no doubt that we can't escape stress. And to be, totally honest, there's certain levels of stress that are actually good.
absolutely, yeah.
Um, but when we get from those lower levels of stress that are productive into these high intense levels of stress, our brain starts to shut down, and it's very difficult to function.
Mm,
And when, if we want to be more productive in work, we should start doing breath work at the
mm,
workplace, right? And that,
yeah,
and I can imagine there might be some executives listening to this, or some leaders or business owners going, "Well, that just that's a too touchy feely. That's too woo
yeah.
woo." Well, listen, do you want to be more productive?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's a real like, I mean, it reminds me of a conversation I had with my mum recently. Like she's an inspiration for me as well. Like I won't give away my age, but I give away her age. She's in her 99th year now, and she's very active still and living independently. She's just a fantastic woman. It's kind of like, would you when we're overwhelmed and working under pressure, how good are the decisions we're making? And when we're working under pressure and trying to do many different things under pressure, under duress, how high is the quality of that work? We're probably likely to make mistakes. We're probably likely to make to make more mistakes and have to kind of redo the work that we've done under pressure that we would have done so much better if we had done less in a more coherent way. Like that's a key HeartMath word as well. And again, it ties in directly to productivity and decision making and the quality of our work as executives, as employees, as human beings. When we're doing things at a slower pace, at a higher quality, which would you prefer to do something a little bit slower of a higher quality and do it perfectly and not require any rework, or to do things under pressure, do the wrong thing quickly, and then have to go back and decide, well, that wasn't the right thing to do or the right decision? I mean, it's a no-brainer for me. And when you put it in simple terms like that about which is going to be more productive and it's going to allow you to do and serve you and serve your customers, your clients, your team, your business, your community, your family, it's from that space of being more deliberate and creating space to
Yeah.
do things not at a pace that doesn't honor them. Like back to the word honor. When you're doing things quickly, how responsible I think is that to yourself and to other people when you're not really serving them in a way that you could serve them if you're creating just a little bit more space. So
Yeah.
I think it's a fundamental human trait that we forgot. Human service that we've forgotten about because we're so busy doing. We often forget, I think, around the power of operating and doing things maybe a little bit more slowly. The cost is you do it a little bit more slowly, but the overall benefit is so much more powerful than that when you have the discipline maybe to do that.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that when we're under pressure in the workspace, and our brain starts to not function very well, we start making these mistakes.
Yeah.
Then from a leadership standpoint, the level of stress just starts to compound.
Oh
And
yeah.
then we put more pressure on an individual to get their stuff together, right?
Mm,
Like, oh, you
mm,
made these mistakes, and now there's the situation, and then there's more pressure on top of that to fix it, because now it's a escalated, right? It's a high level of sort of pressure of visibility. And then, it's like there's no wonder that there's this mental health crisis in the
yeah.
world, that we
Mm,
just constantly are compounding the situation, and it continues to perpetuate. And can you imagine that if you're a leader and you have an employee that makes a mistake, instead of going to them and putting more pressure on them to fix it, going to them and saying, "Are you okay?"
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine. Yeah.
Just let's take a moment, take a
Mm,
deep breath, right? Like we do this with our children
yeah.
sometimes, right? Like,
Mm,
hey, settle down. It's okay. We'll figure this out. Take a breath, take a few minutes, chill out,
yeah.
relax, and let's recuperate. Let's reconvene here in a few minutes, right? Like,
Yeah. We'll work our way through this, and that's such a fantastic, because you're in my corner, you're understanding. There's where the empathy comes back in from your
yeah,
sage. Okay, you're clearly overwhelmed, as you're not performing at your optimal.
yeah,
Let's re-engage with this. Like, how fantastic would that be if more businesses were operating from that space, and again, really experiencing the power of that in terms of the business results that will emanate when you trust that process, or begin maybe again, don't convert to 100% of, from Monday we're all going to be very empathetic leaders, and I think we're going to do things completely differently. It's a very slow, gradual process.
yeah.
But I think a small starting point is maybe an invitation out of today's conversation, or this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I love this conversation, and I want to be respectful of your time and the listeners' time. And I mean, you and I could probably talk about this topic
Yeah.
for the next 3 or 4 hours, and we're not going to have a 4 hour podcast. So let's go ahead and wrap it up. And for me, the takeaway is just from our conversation today is there's lots of stressors in the world. We're not perfect, and the best way to manage that is to go internal, have some awareness, take some breaths, slow down, and um, and the more that we can facilitate this as a group of individuals. So let's, in my world, in the business world, we'll call it teamwork.
Mm,
The more that we can take a breath and slow down when the pressure starts to rise, then the better we'll function as a unit and the more productive we can be. And that takes leadership. And, that's the whole purpose of this show is uh, bringing awareness and joining the conversation about heart-centered leadership and how that can be more productive and more successful, not just for business, but for humanity.
yeah. Yeah. And it's
So,
from that foundation of humanity, I guess. Just maybe the one or two final thoughts. Was how are you feeling? How does this feel for you? And allow yourself to experience the and get curious with that as a process, and notice from your inside out what's going on when you create that space. And again, maybe if it works for you, fantastic. If it doesn't, well, that's okay too. You haven't lost that much time, but it's the invitation to examine it as a potential solution to an important business strategy tool, I guess.
yeah. So thank you so much, Seamus Power, for joining me in this conversation. It was wonderful, delightful. I really enjoyed it. Um, if the listeners want to connect with you and find more out about the work that you're doing, where's the best place to connect with you?
Easiest thing probably is in LinkedIn. So either look up Seamus Power or Powering Health and make a connection on LinkedIn. I post reasonably regularly in there, some articles and posts. And other than that, I have a website called poweringhealth.ie. So it's an Irish website. So Powering Health, all one word, .ie. And if you want to find out a little bit more about me, my story, and how I work and how I serve, you can go there too. But LinkedIn is probably the best connection point.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Jason, so much. Thank you.